Greetings everyone and welcome to No BS Baking. You got JP here, and today I want to talk about dough development and conditioning. Now, how many times have you found your dough too elastic? It's springing back, it's not shaping how you want. What causes this and how to deal with it? Well, it all starts with understanding both the mechanical and enzymatic processes at play. So as we talk about dough development and conditioning, it's crucial to understand the distinct stages a dough goes through during mixing. Now, I've covered these in other videos, but let's do a quick recap. Number 1, the pickup stage. This is the initial phase where all your ingredients fully hydrate and come together, forming a cohesive mass of dough. Peak development. Now, at this point, your dough and its gluten network have reached their maximum stiffness and strength. This truly represents the peak of your dough's developmental phase. Immediately following peak, the dough begins to gradually soften. During this stage, the dough develops its extensibility, becoming more pliable. Stability time is a key indicator of the flour's strength and gluten quality. For many bakers, this phase offers a crucial insight into optimal mixing times, allowing them to achieve the specific rheological characteristics they desire for their dough. Finally, we enter the breakdown phase. Now, this is often referred to as departure. As the dough's consistency falls below the 500 unit line on the farina graph. Now, at this point, the dough is weakened past its stability. It's interesting to note that weaker flours can show signs of excessive softening and overmixing very quickly in this phase. Whereas strong bread flours can maintain their structure and ride out these curves with only a gradual and minimal impact for 20 minutes or even longer. What these examples illustrated to me was that the flour we were looking at was generally a weaker one. Now, the data on these curves represents only flour and water mixed together, with hydration usually between 50 and 60% for these tests. In most doughs, salt is added, which could also extend the stability time by as much as 50% depending on the flour and hydration. Now, I think it's safe to assume a minimum of 25% longer stability time can be expected. Now, ultimately, when it comes to optimizing mix times for different flours, bakers rely on this science to achieve their perfect balance, both elasticity and extensibility in their doughs. Most of us know what an undermixed dough looks like. It's lumpy, ragged, and is not formed into a smooth, cohesive texture like example 2. But even with this, a common challenge with high-protein flours, even after mixing for 8 or 10 minutes at standard hydration, say around 60 to 70%, is that the dough may still not achieve a window-pane effect. This is because the high gluten content requires conditioning. A properly conditioned dough will be smooth, extensible, and produce a nice, unforced window pane. So, mixing develops the gluten, creating a cohesive, elastic dough, and conditioning softens and relaxes the gluten, creating the desired balance of elasticity and extensibility you want for the product you are producing. Conditioning happens naturally during the rest periods or can be accelerated by using reducing agents like L-cysteine, deactivated yeast, which are designed to shorten mix times. Now, using fresh milled spelt and corazon, typically weaker flours, this baking assistant member sent me this video on how he achieved perfectly developed dough with an excellent window pane in just 12 minutes of mixing. Mind you, he added a little bit of vital wheat gluten. Now, the gluten addition provided the necessary strength, and his longer mix time contributed nicely to breaking down the elasticity sufficient for a nice final consistency. So who said home-milled ancient wheat flours were difficult? Well, they're not for Rob. By assuring a proper balance of ingredients and processing standards, beautiful bread results. Autolyse is not just about soaking flour. It's a critical step that provides multiple benefits. First, it allows the starches and proteins in flour to fully hydrate, leading to more evenly moist and pliable dough. Second, the natural enzymes within the flour spring into action. Proteases begin to break down some of the flour's proteins, which makes the gluten more extensible and easier to work with. Amylases convert complex starches into simple sugars, a food source for your yeast, which contributes to more robust fermentation and a richer, deeper flavor in your final bread. In most cases, all the water is generally added into the flour during Autolyse to keep things simple. However, there are a few exceptions where bakers may opt not to. Here are some of those reasons. You can stop the video if you want to check it out. And when it comes to high hydration doughs, stretch and folds are absolutely crucial because they're a primary method for developing gluten strength and structure in a way that traditional kneading cannot efficiently achieve with very wet doughs. Now, the process is quite simple, and there are many videos and slight variations online demonstrating the technique. Just remember to have a little bit of water on your hands, take your time, and you'll figure this out quickly. Here are some of the benefits of the stretch and fold process, specifically focusing on how it strengthens the gluten in dough. From the conditioning side of the dough development equation, this is realized through the rest times provided after each stretch and fold step, determined optimum by a window pane check after each rest. I've covered off mechanical mixing and mix times extensively in past videos, so I won't rehash all the details. However, it's vital to stress that mixing is absolutely critical for baking great bread. While no-knead breads have their place, let's be real, they rarely achieve the same look or quality as bread that's been mechanically or hand-kneaded. Plus, they aren't significantly faster to make. Even a little bit of hand kneading can dramatically improve your final product. As I mentioned earlier, if you're using a strong bread flour, you might not achieve a perfect window pane test. Now, this is often achieved after a rest period, like a double in size rest common with most home baking processes. However, for more weaker or abrasive flours like all-purpose, whole wheat, or ancient wheat, your mixing time is determined by window pane development. Just like the folding processes, whether you're folding or resting or using a mixer, the window pane test, not some arbitrary time from a website, should guide your mixing and the status of your dough development. The video segment from the baking assistant member earlier perfectly demonstrates this point. He used home-milled ancient wheat flours, which are generally medium in protein, with a little added vital wheat gluten. His mixer's sweet spot was 12 minutes. The takeaway is clear. Different flours, different ingredients, and different mixers all require different mixing times. Now, if you find that standard processing time just isn't providing the extensibility you're looking for, there are numerous options for what to use, how much, and for what purpose is beyond my time constraints in this video, but get the next level look at baking ingredients in the store for solving this common baking issue and many more. Those of you that follow me, you know that I love overnight refrigerated bulk fermentation. I generally use this as a simple process variant to regular bake plan. Now, generally it's the same process, with the exception of keeping my final dough temperature a little cool, say 74 degrees or 23-ish, and just covering it up, putting it in the fridge instead of the counter. But I always ensure the dough is around double in size before final processing. I like this method for a number of reasons. This process gives me a lot of flexibility. Once the dough is double in size, I can pull everything out of the fridge and process as normal. Or if I need a bit more time to ensure fresh baked bread is on the table for dinner, I can simply shape it, pan it, and put it back in the fridge, covered of course, and pull it at any time that better suits my dinner plans. The dough feels amazing. It's not sticky, puffy, and it's beautifully soft and extensible, making it easier for shaping, especially for things like focaccia pans or burger molds, to name a few. When I'm planning an overnight bulk fermentation with a product that contains commercial yeast, I always work yeast back from my standard. I find that with my ingredients in my climate, the control-based guidelines on yeast are right in the ballpark for me, so I usually work from there. However, you would want to work from your established standard. Now, I usually drop the yeast a bit, not as much as science tells me I should. I consistently get a double in size within around 8 to 12 hour timing, so my reduction of only 30% seems pretty good. And I live in the tropics. Now, it's always a good idea to feel this process out based on your recipe, ingredients, and environment. But remember, less yeast just means a bit longer. Too much yeast may result in next day problems. The only drawback that I can think of, if you want to call it that, is that final proof can take a little longer, being that the dough is cold from the fridge. However, if you proof it like you normally would for a standard dough, from my experience, the proof times are only extended around an hour more than usual. Now, there are two methods that I'm familiar with. Basically, room temperature bulk fermentation, then shape and final proof in the refrigerator. Then there's refrigerated bulk fermentation, shape, and then stored or proofed in the refrigerator. Now, I've mostly seen this method used for pizza dough. However, I've also witnessed some beautiful breads made with the process where after panning, they're stored until required, being partially proofed in the refrigerator, then pulled for a bit of room temperature proofing prior to baking. Mostly, I've seen this used as a scheduling hack. So here's some science-based guidelines for yeast levels when planning a long, cold final proof. When dough is refrigerated, yeast activity slows down considerably. According to numerous scientific resources, for approximately every 10 degrees Celsius or 18 Fahrenheit drop in temperature, yeast activity is roughly cut in half. Now, this principle of halved activity is most accurate down to about 10 degrees Celsius, 50 Fahrenheit, below which yeast metabolism becomes even more sluggish. Now, these guidelines provided for cold proofing generally reflect a process where the dough has already undergone some amount of bulk fermentation or a first rise at room temperature, then is shaped, panned, and placed in the refrigerator for final proof. Now, the objective of this process depends on the product, but in all cases, this process increases the flavor profile, but we'll look at this a bit more in a minute. When slow refrigerated final proof is desired, a double in size fermentation is not generally ideal. The dough is active, and although you punch it back and shape it at your kitchen temperature, when you put it in the fridge, it will take time to cool down and the yeast activity to slow. So a moderate increase in volume is better and inclusive of both sourdough and commercial yeast style products. So as you can see that although this is based in baking science, it is mainly common sense, and one of the important ingredient and process interplays bakers should always consider. So here is just a few more tidbits about cold final proofing as it pertains to sourdough. Commercial yeast is predictable, stronger, and dependable, whereas the yeast in sourdough commonly is natural and can be quite different from location to location and even batch to batch, requiring often more attention to the dough's look and feel than when using its commercial counterpart. Therefore, although some of the aforementioned information about yeast and cold fermentation holds true, wild yeast depends on how happy it is and tends to do its job on its own schedule, so understanding its idiosyncrasies is critical for consistent results. Cold final proof or fermentation with sourdough allows the lab to produce more organic acids, lactic and acetic acid, which contribute to the flavor characteristics. Cool temperatures have a tendency to create more acetic acid, that tangy sour flavor, and lactic acid, on the other hand, tends to be produced more readily at warmer temperatures, resulting in a milder, more creamy or fruity notes.